so much, everyone. Really excited to be here. Obviously, would prefer to be in person, particularly given that it's Oktoberfest. I'm Adam Spencer. I'm the president of AbleDocs. We're a world-renowned leader in PDF accessibility products and services. And I'm here today to talk to you about why is making PDF UA documents so hard. What I hope is we get a lot of interaction on this. I obviously wishing that we were in person, could do a few raises of hands and hear some laughter from you, but talking into a camera has become the new norm, so we'll obviously do the best that we can. I'm always excited when it comes to the fall meetings with the PDF Association, because typically it means we're either in Munich or Berlin, so a big toast to Oktoberfest, wishing we could be there in person. So what is UA and why does it matter? Well, PDF UA is an ISO standard. A number of you, I'm sure, on this call have been contributing members to building out that spec. It is ISO 14289-1, and we're working on -2 to be coming out in final release in the near future, I'm sure, right, Duff? It is a globally recognized standard for PDF accessibility, and that's a really big, important thing to remember. We see contracts come out constantly, or RFP requests, that ask us to generate WCAG compliant PDFs. And we do, but you're not asking for what you actually really want. And what you want is a PDF UA compliant file. I always look at the difference between, am I going to be able to fly a plane with my license or drive a car with a license? It's very different capabilities. And when we talk about UA, we're talking about the applicable technical requirements in making a PDF accessible. So remember, the spec is important. It's not that there's any sort of disagreement between the standards. In fact, they're complementary, but just ask for what you really want, which is PDF UA. So we're talking about universal accessibility, and when we look at PDF content, one of the things that I have dealt with for the last more than a decade in the space is people saying PDFs can't be accessible. Well, that's just not true. A fully accessible UA compliant PDF can be just as accessible as a WCAG compliant website. You have to understand what goes into it in order to get or to maximize what you're getting out of that PDF. And when we're able to do that, we've even got new exciting things like Adobe's announcement a week and a half ago about their new liquid mode. In the reuse of content, a fully structured UA file will always help us do more with the content. So it's not just for screen reader access or for a person with a disability, it's universal access on different devices. How that reading experience can be shared amongst as many people as possible. And we've got to not only think of PDF as a print standard, it is now how we reuse a document of record and get it into the hands of as many people as possible. And there was a war waging for many, many years about PDF should die and everything should be a web page. And the simple fact is that's not true. PDF content is one of the most important means of conveying communication of a given piece of content. And there is no need for a fight on this. There will, for the foreseeable future at least, likely 20 years down the road, there will be PDF in our life. And that's a good thing, because we get so much fidelity out of a document and can reuse it for so many other things, rather than a web page, which is not usually optimized for print, distribution. And you've got to remember that things like PDF-A for archiving are iterative. So we can have a fully accessible file that can also be archived, and there's no conflict. And you really don't get that power out of HTML. Yes, we can do pretty things on a web page, but when we're looking at the way that we communicate content and guaranteeing what's on that page, PDF is really the only format, which is why there has been so much effort behind making PDFs accessible. It is a normative technical standard, and that's a big word for it is prescriptive in what it says and how to make things technically accessible. What it does not do is discuss your content, right? Your content is what you design it. It's our job in the PDF space to make that content available to as many users as possible. So we have additional guidelines that help us with content looking towards WCAG for things like the most famous that is always brought up is color contrast and font size. The problem is these are old approaches to accessibility which don't apply in the same degree anymore. And a lot of that has to do with mobile devices. When we look at a screen, we don't have the same point size for font anymore. So when we see everyone asking for 12-point font, that's really only referencing static content, which would refer to printed content, not for digital. When we have a fully accessible file, we can manipulate the way that that views on a screen. So if I'm looking at it, from my office on 4 displays, my font size is very different than looking at it on my mobile phone. And that is one of the great things when we start making documents accessible. We unleash so many additional pieces, things like SEO. And so we've got a capability of improving search engine optimization from PDF-based content when making a document fully accessible. One of the big things that you need to know is that it's an additional standard to ISO 32000, or the base standard for PDF. And we see a real misuse of implementations where they can view a PDF, but you're not providing that accessibility, passing that through to an end user. So we see viewers like web-based browsers that are stripping down the rich capabilities of a PDF. So even if you do everything humanly possible, the cool thing about PDF UA is that it requires the file, the viewer, and the adaptive technology to be compliant in order to provide that experience. And that's a good thing. We want standards-based implementations so that we all know that we can interchange the content between all users. Think about back to the old Mac PC war. I mean, that's one of the founding reasons for PDF. The ability to move one file to a different machine and access it in the same way. And we now try to do the same with accessibility. One very important thing is that PDF is not web content. It's a PDF document. We could put it on the web, but it doesn't have to. I can put it onto a USB key, provide it over to, I'll use Duff as my partner in this, and it never needs to touch online. And that's why PDF UA needs to be treated as its own specification. And there are many more technical requirements for that, leading to why one of the challenges with making a PDF document accessible is the underpinnings of it. Because PDF is so rich in its capabilities, you have to have an understanding of the technical side of it in order to make sure you're compliant with all of those requirements. And I'm sure many of you have tested files using very popular implementations like Acrobat's Accessibility Checker, or Common Look's Accessibility Checker, or PAC3, or Quick Fix, but recognizing where those discrepancies are really important. And I couldn't encourage you more than to read the Matterhorn protocol to get a better foundational understanding about why we're making these requirements in looking for those checkboxes. And you've got to remember, checkbox accessibility is not everything. You need to ensure that that content can be accessed because, as the slide says, formats are not created equally, and we have so much power within PDF, but we need to know how to unleash it. And we're trying to ensure that an author's intent is always going to be paramount. We want to make sure that when a designer is creating this incredible layout of content and including things like shading and transparency, all of that comes through, but how you deal with that from a UA perspective is a very important thing. And there are specific techniques, and there are implementations that make that easier and harder than others. And again, I'm not pegging one against the other right now, but you've got to know the difference. And when someone says, my PDF is WCAG compliant, okay, that's nice. You've followed some guidelines, but you haven't ensured that it can be used on every single device. And that's why you have to understand the battle between WCAG and PDF will rage forever. For whatever reason, we at the PDF Association are obviously lovers of WCAG, but there are a number of web developers who continuously try and pretend that PDF is going away, and they aren't. But recognizing that UA and WCAG 2.1 have no conflicts and that they're complementary is a foundational principle that you have to have in the back of your head at all times. So, why is it so hard? Do you have the right tool for the job? A lot of people that I talk to on a regular basis expect major software implementations to just do it for them. I can't tell you the number of, well, in person back in the day. I guess we can say that now. It's been long enough, 6 months. When people would come up and say, we're not going to worry about our document accessibility, I've already had to worry about my website. Documents don't matter. Well, they do, because if you're putting them on your site, they clearly have an important requirement. You're gathering information in a fillable form, as an example, or you're distributing content that must be verifiable going forward. Quite honestly, your authors are used to generating PDFs. We don't create a Word document and then export into a web page. That's not how we create content, and that's not how your authors think about creating content. So do you have the right tool for the job? Recognizing that you cannot create a compliant PDF out of most well-known software implementations. Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, Excel cannot technically generate a compliant PDF. That's not against them, it's just the reality. And recognizing the gap between that is the first step to learning what tools you need to make your content accessible. There are many out there. There are some pros and cons with both, or with all of them, but you've got to recognize where your gaps are, and is that a risk that you're prepared to take? I cannot stress this enough. There are tools and there are consultants who are running around as accessibility is really seen as today's Y2K. Any of you who've heard me speak before will know that that's one of my favorite expressions. People are popping up because they see opportunity in the market, but recognizing that your organization is at risk if you're not picking the right strategy and the right tools to do the job, you leave yourself vulnerable to being non-compliant with your local laws or regulations. And you've got to see the difference. What may seem easy or cheaper on one path will not necessarily give you the right output. So be very careful. And you know, the great thing about the community of accessibility and the PDF Association is we want to help you in understanding. We're educational based, not just sales based. So ask the question and help us help you be pointed in the right direction. The other challenge is skills, right? When we see organizations having a challenge getting people to learn new technologies, and this isn't just web accessibility or PDF or even architects building new things, you've got to recognize that accessibility and PDF UA are specific skill sets, right? This isn't an add-on. You can't expect someone to go through a one-day training course and be an expert, right? The old 10,000 hours argument. The good news is there are tools that help you get there faster, but you need to make sure that you've at least got an understanding through your organization of what's required to make it more accessible. And we see people trying to take shortcuts all the time. I was talking with someone last week and they were saying, well, we don't really teach people how to make a PDF accessible, and we don't really care if it's UA compliant because, well, we had this one reader and he said this was good enough. Well, that good enough argument works for an individual. It may not work for everyone. And when we look at organizations who put together plans for just screen readers or just, you know, I'll use a generic name, you know, John in a department. John has one reading experience, but PDF UA allows us to expand that reach to many, many other people with reading disabilities. And how that person is going to consume content, they may have multiple disabilities. So if you're not just looking for, does this read in JAWS, or does this read in NVDA, or does this read in VoiceOver, what about a Braille display? What about a reflow application to help someone with a cognitive disability? And getting your authors to understand that they're just as responsibility, not just for the words on the page, but for the conveyance of that information. That's why, you know, training everyone to be tagging a PDF, you know, making a PDF accessible may not be the best strategy for you, but understanding where their gaps are and giving them the time to try to make a document accessible. We see so many instances where training courses provide these simple, rigid testing examples that say, look, I can generate a fully compliant file, or it reads well. Okay, it does, but what if you then add in a transparent image and your authoring software doesn't know what to do with it? Or you get into a popular implementation that just artifacts everything and you've lost layers of that rich visual content. Accessibility is for everyone. not just people with print disabilities. It's for all readers. And when we make our files UA compliant, it means we get that rich graphical experience that a sighted user is looking for, but it also unlocks so much more of your graphic designers or your authors that are trying to create that visual experience for everyone. Giving people the time to understand how that training works from a, we call it a 101 level, a basic understanding of what's an accessible PDF, why am I doing this, how do I generate more accessible content, how do I test against it, and do I appreciate the impact of this accessibility going forward. I cannot stress the amount of time that's needed, and that's a good thing. When you hire a web developer, they've likely already gone to college or university. They've been making web pages accessible for years. You've got a content, content management system that is helping them load content into a more accessible template. You can do that with PDF. You just need to know how, and training people on the how is what's most important. It's not my problem. We see this all the time. Pardon me. We see that authors are not interested in taking the time to learn the new skill. So even though you have all the best intentions, we find that people are on a deadline, right? There are very few people who are sitting around with a lot of spare time on their hands within their job. We're all stressed. We all have a million things to do in a day, and now you want me to become a PDF accessibility expert. Knowing the difference between what your author is going to be capable of doing versus maybe a center of excellence within your organization, or supplementing that with software or outside service, is going to be a critical part of your success, because we are all human. People get busy, people get bogged down, and the problem that you face as an organization, or even as an author, is depending on where you are in the world, the penalty against you for creating non-compliant content, and I will tell you as someone who has sat on a number of legal panels, if it's not UA compliant, it's not accessible. So when we're looking at the not my problem issue, we're faced with an organizational change that needs to get people to understand this is your problem. You may not have the solution, but we as an organization have figured that out, and we can make sure that all of the files are accessible at the time of publishing and distribution. Good enough is no longer good enough. I mentioned earlier about the challenge with getting people to, well, it's tagged, and I used Adobe Read Out Loud, which I cannot reiterate again or enough. It's not a screen reader, it's a text-to-speech engine, and that's nothing against Adobe or the implementation, but someone with a print disability is looking for semantics. That's why we add in all of these tags for headings and lists and tables and links, and building in all of that rich structure to help people understand what you as the author are trying to convey. Without all of those semantics and all of the rich capabilities in PDF UA, we're reading someone a bedtime story, right? It's a monotone run through the content. That's not how we read. That's not how we're taught how to read or consume content. And the same holds true for someone with a print disability. So when we see this approach of, well, it's got tags and that's fine. Well, is your alt text appropriate? Your text description of an image, is it really conveying your intent of that picture or that diagram? Or are you just trying to get through and pass a checker so you see all green checks? And we see that constantly. It's not my problem. I don't care. So long as it passes the checks, away you go. Are you sure that that's enough? If you're missing content, we had an example of a client who tried to automatically tag all of their content, running it through an engine that was guessing. And the problem was, these were documents that had compliance regulations against them. And there's no way that that would pass. They would expose themselves to so much greater litigation going forward. They were a US client, and I know we're from around the world, but from a US context, the litigation against withholding personal information from that person because the document wasn't tagged correctly leads them to a risk exposure that maybe 8 years ago, 10 years ago, you could get away with. It's tagged, it reads, that's okay. It's 2020. And I bluntly thought when I got into this industry many years ago that we'd be out of a job by now and everything would be automatically tagged. And the reality is it isn't, and it won't be for quite some time. But not that we're not working on that, but the challenge becomes This is the difference between someone living an independent life or not. And when we hear people, well, we don't have people with print disabilities. Well, you could get hit by a bus tomorrow and lose your sight. And wouldn't you want barrier-free access? So recognizing that you need to know that it is technical, you need the right tool for the job, you need the right support for the job, and you need the right process in place, because good enough is no longer good enough. And organizations like ours and many others in the space care about the accessibility of that content. You've got to be asking the right thing from the right people, not just the lowest price or not just the quickest way to get it off your plate, because it could be you one day. And I know personally, I want to be able to access the content that's available. That is my time. So this is us, this is AbleDocs, and this is our contact information. Please feel free to reach out anytime. You can also email us through the website. And Duff, I think I now go straight into Q&A, correct?
Sure. Yep, I'm going to send you the questions that we have, and encourage those on the call, if you have questions for Adam, please do put them in the question box. So Adam, you should see a couple of the questions.
There we go. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't have that panel open. The question is are there any tools that can tag all unmarked links at once? The answer is yes, and that is definitely possible. 2, is there any tool that can drag table and figure tags out of another tag, such as a P tag, at once? So your question is, can you remove a P tag, like an inline element? I don't, and Duff, I may actually defer to you on this. I don't know of a tool that can remove the figure tag or the table tags from a P tag, but there are definitely tools that could rename those tags so that they're not P tags anymore. And Kelly, if you have additional questions, please feel free to send that over. The next question is, what is an example of a reflow application that people use to read a PDF? Great question. Actually, you can do it in Adobe Acrobat or Adobe Reader. You can also do it in VIP Reader. You can do it in a product from us, which will be rebranded. It's currently called QuickFix. It will soon be called Access PDF. So there are a number, and there are also a number of reflow applications for, well, the liquid mode from Adobe on mobile. That's probably a big one. But there are some new applications that are coming out to help that on a mobile device that will be coming out in the new year. Can I provide some tools for creating PDF UA documents? Yes, I can, but I will hold on to that for 3 minutes. Is it possible to convince clients to not only rely on Adobe Checker for accessibility? Eric, that's a great question. I hope so. Nothing against the Adobe Acrobat Checker, and I would never be one to pit one implementation over another. The reality is that is not Adobe's only function. They do a really good job with accessibility, but it's not their primary driver, and I think it's really important to remember that. I would suggest you're looking at either Pack3, QuickFix, Access PDF, or Common Looks checkers. Those would be the best. And my comment, particularly when it comes to procurement, is you as an organization need to get your procurement team to recognize what tools are the best in the space. And I can't stress it more. You've got to be asking for what you actually need versus what people know by name. And that becomes part of the challenge. PDF is an open standard, right? It's an ISO standard. It's managed by a bunch of volunteers at the ISO level and the PDF Association. It is not just a single company's product anymore. So recognizing what works for you and recognizing the differences between those implementations is really important. How do you test things that are compliant with different disabilities? Well, that's a great question. I would suggest that your starting place is my PDF UA compliant? And then you start to look at adding on additional applications to test for those different types of disabilities or combinations of disabilities. So there's a list, and you're welcome to send me an email, Surinder, if you'd like, and I can get back to you with that comprehensive list. We just don't have a ton of time, so I can't list through that. The next question is, what are your thoughts that you can have PDFs that are WCAG compliant, but not necessarily PDF UA compliant? That can be an interesting point when you are working in a region that needs to be only WCAG compliant. So that's a great question. And my comment to that would be, if you're asking for your PDF to be WCAG compliant, you haven't done your research to recognize that PDF UA is what you actually need. So I live in a place, I live in Ontario, Canada, and we have legislation that is not specific to PDF UA. But there also aren't any checkers that are specifically only WCAG compliant. And we see checkers that exist that have WCAG compliance checks, but they're not going through everything you need to be compliant in PDF. Why would you not provide a PDF UA compliant file? We do it all the time. Trying to actually dumb down a PDF to be WCAG but not UA compliant makes no sense. If I'm assuming you're a remediator or potentially a buyer of these services or in need of them, just ask for PDF UA and you're going to get what you need. There isn't a tool that only creates WCAG compliant PDFs. There are tools that create not fully compliant PDF UA, but everyone else is working towards UA, so why would you go for a standard that's not applicable? And I think that's a really important difference. So when I spend a lot of time working with legislative groups saying, when you're looking for documents, they need to be PDF UA compliant. And again, that requirement is so important because now you're providing truly accessible content. The next question is, how do you reflow with parts that are forms in the PDF? Can I say we're working on it? Is that a fair comment to make? That is really an implementation issue. The capability is there, the technology is there, the implementation is not. So my suggestion would be, it's coming. Are there tools to tag PDF documents automatically besides Acrobat Pro? Absolutely there are. Now, you've got to be careful. There are two times when you can really add tags. There are times when you're creating the document, and there are times afterwards where you're adding documents after the fact. We have tools that can do both. We can automatically add tags during creation as well as after the fact. There are other tools that can do things similar, but you do need to recognize what you're getting. There is no tool that can generate a PDF UA file that is compliant automatically without any pre-existing instruction. It's impossible. We just aren't there with our AI yet. There are arguments that it's coming, and people's claims we've seen for a number of years that that's a thing. However, it's not. And you can get to the point where you're passing checkers, but you still manually need to review that content. Even to be PDF UA compliant, there are components that need to be manually reviewed. I can pass a checker, I can spoof a checker, and recognizing that, yes, I have all my green checks, but if I tag everything as a figure and I put my alt attribute as quote space quote, I can pass a checker because all my content's provided and I've created an alt text reference, but it's not readable. And the most important thing, the fundamental part of PDF UA is, am I semantically conveying the author's intent with my content or with my tagging? And the answer is, if it's fully automated and that hasn't had a reference back, the answer is no. So you've got to be very careful with what you can do. Which accessibility problems would still exist if a document is just, oh, that's a long list. I would suggest that we get in touch because there are other questions and I'm unfortunately going to run out of time. So the question is, if it's just WCAG 2.1 AA compliant, what else can we do to convince them to go for PDF UA? And quite honestly, my answer is it's easier to go to PDF UA than not. So you might as well do it. The next question is, if you put some PDFs to one PDF together, how do you make the new whole PDF accessible and compliant? Okay, so you've got two fully tagged PDFs. There's, depending on your implementation, and you can do this in Acrobat and you can do it in others, you can merge those files and maintain the tag structure. There's an accessible way to do it, and there's an inaccessible way to do it. I will say one thing that you need to review manually, even if you maintain those strings, you have to re-review your tag structure, because the way that those tags get added, you may now have an issue with your headings or your link structure. All of those can be impacted. So you need to be careful how you merge those files, rather than just automatically assuming that that's fully compliant. And there are different tags for organizing content that would have an impact. And again, feel free to reach out and we can respond to that. You can always email us at contact@abledocs.com, CONTACT, no, I did that wrong, CONTACT @abledocs.com, ABLEDOCS. And we're happy to answer those questions. Duff, I know we're kind of at our 5 minutes for Q&A. Unless there's anything else, we've got 5 to go.
You have about 3.5 minutes to go.
3.5, then there we go.
Oh, there is, I think I just saw one other question came in. Here, I'll move it along to you.
Last but not least, does Pack fail XFA PDFs that are made with LiveCycle? Yes. That was easy. The short answer is, all joking aside, there is not a readily available testing tool for LiveCycle or XFA PDFs for accessibility. It is a manual review. Pack is built around testing for 32,000 14289-1 PDFs, and that is not an XFA. So there is a gap, and because it's now been deprecated in the latest version, there's a discrepancy as to where we go from here. So the short answer is you cannot test an XFA PDF with Pack or any other. And Duff, I don't think there's anything publicly available that allows for that to happen. There was years ago, but not anymore.
I think you're right about that.
Yeah. But Hatem, if you've got a question, I can show you some techniques that can help you. So with that, I never like to be too salesy in my sessions. I always hope that they're educational, and I hope you've learned a lot. So thank you for taking the time during these weird times. But we are AbleDocs. We have 17 different approaches for PDF and PDF accessibility. Whether that's products or services, we can handle everything from validation, testing, creation, high volume document accessibility that's fully automated and fully compliant. We also offer training and academy courses. We're really solely focused on document accessibility, trying to make it easier for our clients. And looking into our product lineup, you'll see that breadth of experience. Our new website is coming out in the new year, as we announced a large merger in the summer. So bear with us as we're trying to get that content up, but you will see a whole bunch of new content from us via the PDF Association, and as well as other online distribution channels like LinkedIn. But if you ever have a document accessibility question, please feel free to reach out. We're not just a service provider. We are all about making sure that you've got tools that can help you make documents more accessible and validate that you truly are getting UA compliant content. Really, again, appreciate the time, and thank you, Duff and Matthias, for the opportunity to speak at Oktoberfest, and hopefully we'll be able to do that again soon in person.